What if I told you that right now, at this very moment, the United Nations is assembling a team of 21 scientists to calculate something they haven't dared to calculate in 35 years? Something so disturbing that three nuclear powers actively tried to block the investigation? We all know nuclear weapons can level cities. That's the easy part to understand. One bomb, one city, millions dead. But here's what nobody talks about at dinner parties. The real death toll doesn't even start until months after the mushroom clouds fade. And for the first time since 1988, the UN is finally running the numbers on what actually happens next. Think about this timing for a second. The last time anyone officially studied this was when the Berlin Wall was still standing. Since then, our global population has grown by 50%. Our food systems have become completely interconnected. One disruption in Ukraine affects bread prices in Egypt. One shipping delay in Asia empties grocery shelves in Europe. We've built a world that runs on just-in-time delivery. And now someone's finally asking the obvious question: what happens to 7.8 billion people when that system stops working? The resolution passed in December 2024 with 136 countries voting yes. France, Russia, and the UK voted no. The United States didn't even vote. China said yes. That split alone tells you something important is happening here. And the timing? We're watching this unfold while American bunker busters are literally cratering Iranian nuclear facilities. While Israel and Iran are exchanging missiles. While everyone says the nuclear sites are destroyed, finished, problem solved. But here's what keeps me up at night. They said the same thing about Iraq's nuclear program in 1981. They said the same thing about Syria in 2007. Yet here we are again. See, back in the 80s, we had Carl Sagan and his TTAPS team warning about nuclear winter. They used simple models, basically calculating on computers less powerful than your phone. Critics called them alarmists. The military downplayed it. They coined cute terms like nuclear autumn to make it sound less scary. But here's what's genuinely unsettling. Every single improvement in climate modeling since then has made the picture worse, not better. The new study uses supercomputers running models that track individual weather patterns, ocean currents, even how soot particles behave at different altitudes. And these aren't theoretical exercises anymore. We've watched massive wildfires darken skies across continents. We've seen volcanic eruptions affect global temperatures. We have real data now. Let me share one calculation that stopped me cold. Researchers at Rutgers ran the numbers on what happens if India and Pakistan, just those two countries, used 100 Hiroshima-sized bombs. That's less than 1% of the world's nuclear arsenal. The models show global temperatures dropping by 1 to 2 degrees Celsius. Crop yields crash. International food trade collapses. 2 billion people starve to death. From a regional conflict most of us would watch on the news while eating breakfast. But that's the small scenario. The team also modeled what happens if the United States and Russia empty their arsenals. The number they came up with? 5 billion dead from starvation alone. Not from the bombs. From hunger. That's 2/3 of humanity dying because the sun gets blocked by soot for a decade. Now think about what's happening right now. The US just dropped bunker busters on Iranian nuclear sites. Israel's been striking facilities for months. Officials say Iran's nuclear program is crippled. But every intelligence agency in the world knows you can't bomb knowledge. You can't destroy physics equations. And you definitely can't uninvent nuclear weapons. What you can do is make a cornered nation desperate. And desperate nations with nuclear knowledge do unpredictable things. Now you might think, surely they're overestimating the fires. Maybe modern cities won't burn like they assume. That's exactly what Princeton researchers wondered. So they built a block-by-block inventory of Washington, D.C., cataloging every building's materials, calculating fuel loads down to the furniture. Turns out we filled our cities with more flammable materials than ever before. Plastics, synthetics, materials that burn hotter and produce more soot than anything in 1945 Hiroshima. Here's another detail that changes everything. Fallout patterns. The old models assumed radiation would mostly stay local, but new simulations tracking actual wind patterns show something terrifying. A single strike on missile silos in the American Midwest, not even cities, just military targets in empty fields, would spread lethal radiation across 300 million people. the entire continental United States, most of Canada, parts of Mexico. There's nowhere to run because the wind doesn't care about borders. The panel isn't just climate scientists either. They've brought in economists, doctors, social scientists, agricultural experts. Because this time they're asking different questions. Not just will it get cold, but what happens when global supply chains freeze? When hospitals can't function? When governments collapse? They're studying something called cascade failure. Picture dominoes, but each domino is a critical system. Banking networks crash when communications fail. Food distribution stops when fuel runs out. Law enforcement vanishes when there's no food to distribute. Each failure triggers the next until you're left with what one researcher privately called a terminal civilizational event. But here's where healthy skepticism matters. Models are still models. They require assumptions about targeting, about fire behavior, about atmospheric chemistry. Some critics point out we don't really know how much soot reaches the stratosphere versus falling as rain. The panel acknowledges these uncertainties. Their report will include error bars, confidence intervals, ranges of outcomes. The question is whether that uncertainty matters when even the best-case scenarios show catastrophe. It's like arguing whether the avalanche will be 20 feet deep or 30 feet deep when you're standing at the bottom of the mountain. What makes this moment particularly urgent? We're not watching threats anymore. We're watching actual strikes on actual nuclear facilities. The doomsday clock just moved to 89 seconds to midnight, the closest it's ever been. And that was before the bunker busters started falling. The study won't be complete until 2027, but preliminary findings are already leaking through academic conferences. One atmospheric physicist told colleagues the updated models show something unexpected: a nuclear summer following the nuclear winter. After a decade of cooling, all that soot eventually settles. But the massive fires release so much carbon dioxide that once the sun returns, we get rapid warming. Imagine surviving 10 years of frozen darkness only to face runaway greenhouse effect. The panel is also discovering that previous studies missed crucial feedback loops: ozone depletion from the heated stratosphere, ocean current disruptions lasting centuries. Soil microbiome collapse making agriculture impossible even after temperatures recover. Each new finding makes recovery look less like rebuilding and more like starting over from the Stone Age. You know what's darkly ironic? The scientists involved say they'd rather be wrong. Alan Robach, who spent 40 years studying this, recently said he hopes future generations look back and laugh at how pessimistic they were. But then he adds, the data doesn't lie. The physics doesn't care about our hopes. The UN panel will examine everything from immediate blast effects to generational genetic damage. They're creating what one member called an encyclopedia of endings, because that's what nuclear war is. Not just an ending, but multiple endings happening simultaneously. The end of agriculture, the end of trade, the end of governments, the end of the very climate patterns that made civilization possible. Some panel members are pushing to include psychological impacts in the study. What happens to human behavior when everyone knows 7 billion people are going to starve? Do societies rally together or tear themselves apart? History suggests both, which might be worse than either. There's one scenario they're modeling that nobody wants to talk about publicly. What if a nuclear exchange triggers other nuclear powers to launch preemptively? What if Pakistan sees India launching and assumes they're the target? What if China misreads American missiles headed for Russia? The models show these cascade scenarios could turn a limited exchange into full global thermonuclear war in under an hour. And right now, with American bombs falling on Iranian nuclear sites, with Israel and Iran trading missiles, we're watching one of these scenarios play out in real time. They tell us it's controlled. They tell us it's surgical. They tell us the nuclear facilities are destroyed. But we've heard that before. Yet for all this darkness, the study has a purpose beyond cataloging doom. As Melissa Park from the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons put it, this is about replacing dogma with data. Because right now, nuclear policy runs on assumptions from when computers filled entire rooms. The resistance from nuclear powers is telling. France, Russia, and the UK didn't just abstain. They actively voted against studying what their own weapons would do. It's like refusing to read the side effects on a medication that could kill everyone in the room. Meanwhile, countries without nuclear weapons overwhelmingly supported the study. They know they'd be the innocent bystanders in someone else's nuclear exchange. Imagine living in Brazil or Nigeria, thinking you're safe because you have no bombs, then watching your crops fail because two countries decided to settle their differences with thermonuclear weapons. The 21 scientists selected for this panel come from every continent, every major discipline. They're not activists. They're not politicians. They're researchers who've spent careers studying complex systems. And they're all converging on the same conclusion. We've built a weapon that doesn't just destroy enemies. It destroys the conditions for human life. Some will dismiss this as fear-mongering. But consider this. Every improvement in modeling, every advance in computer power, every new data set we add makes the picture more detailed, and every detail makes it worse. We're not discovering that nuclear war is survivable. We're discovering new ways it kills us. The panel's final report will be public, translated into every major language, distributed to every government. Because in the end, this isn't classified information. The physics of nuclear winter doesn't care about security clearances. The math of global starvation doesn't require top-secret briefings. What happens after 2027 when the report drops? Maybe nothing. Maybe it joins the pile of urgent warnings we collectively ignore. Or maybe, just maybe, seeing the full picture finally makes the unthinkable truly unthinkable. The universe spent 13.8 billion years creating the conditions for Earth to harbor life. It took another 3.8 billion years for that life to develop consciousness. And now that consciousness has figured out how to delete itself in an afternoon. The only question left is whether we're smart enough not to push the button. Science gives us the numbers. 5 billion dead, 10 years of darkness, centuries of recovery if recovery is even possible. The rest is up to us. And if you're looking for hope, remember this. We're the first species in history that can see its own extinction coming and choose a different path. The real question is whether we will. Want to keep learning about the discoveries that matter? The next video is already waiting.